I've only told this story out loud maybe twice. Not because it's a secret, it's not. It's just that when I try to say it fast, it comes out wrong. It comes out like a war story, and it isn't one. Not really. The war part is just the room it happened in. So let me slow it down. My name doesn't matter much. Guys called me Cole. I was the youngest on the team by 4 years, which meant I carried the heavy stuff and kept my mouth shut and watched everything. Watching is what the young ones do. You watch the older guys to learn how to survive, and after a while you realize you're not learning how to fight. You're learning how to carry things, how to carry weight without letting people see it in your walk. Our commander was the best I ever saw at that. His name was Elias Ward, call sign Chapel. Nobody remembered exactly why. Somebody said it was because he was quiet like a church on a Tuesday. Somebody else said it was because when he prayed before a jump, the whole bird went silent, even the loud guys. I think it was both. He was a tall man with gray coming in at the sides, and he had this way of looking at you that made you feel like he'd already read the last page of your life and decided not to tell you how it ended. Chapel didn't talk about himself, ever. In 6 years, I knew maybe 3 real things about him. He had a daughter he wrote letters to and never mailed. He couldn't sleep after 2 in the morning. And there was a name he never said, but that lived in the back of his jaw, because sometimes when a mission went sideways his teeth would clench, and I swear I could see it sitting there behind his lips. A name. Waiting. I didn't know that name yet. On the day this story starts, I didn't know anything except that we were flying into hell, and hell that week looked like a coastline that had been shaken to pieces. There'd been an earthquake. Not the kind you see on the news for a day and forget. This one had torn the ground open along a whole mountain coast district, 7-point-something. The number stopped mattering after the first town. Buildings that had stood for 100 years just knelt down into the street like tired animals. Roads folded. Bridges dropped their middles into the rivers. And the sea, when the ground shook, the sea had come up too. Not a wave you could point at. Just a slow, ugly rising that filled the low streets with brown water and left boats sitting on rooftops. We weren't there to fight anybody. I want to be clear about that. This wasn't a shooting mission. We were part of a humanitarian corridor, escort a medical convoy in, help the search and rescue crews reach the districts the aid trucks couldn't, pull people out, hold the corridor open so the doctors could work. That was it. But here's the thing about a broken place. When everything falls, some men see a chance. Food ran out. Water ran out. And within 3 days, there were armed groups moving through the wreckage, some just desperate families with a rifle, some worse than that. Men who'd figured out that a convoy of medicine and fuel was worth more than gold now. So the help people mission and the somebody might shoot at you mission were the same mission. They usually are out there. Nobody tells you that when you sign up. We came in low over the coast at first light. I remember pressing my head to the window and looking down and just not having a word for it. The town below us didn't look destroyed. Destroyed is too clean. It looked interrupted. Like a photograph somebody had crumpled up in their fist and then tried to smooth flat again. Streets went nowhere. A church steeple lay on its side in a market square like a felled tree. And everywhere tiny movement, people, digging, standing, looking up at us with their hands over their eyes. Chapel was up front. He didn't look out the window. He was studying a map on his knee that he'd already memorized because that's what he did when he was thinking. His hands stayed busy so his face could stay still. District's called Veta Bassa, he said over the net. Low town, that's what it meant roughly in the local tongue. The low town, the part that flooded. SAR teams can't get in from the North Road, it's gone. We open away from the harbor side, we get the doctors to the field hospital, we help them clear the collapsed sites. Standard. But listen. We listened. When Chapel said listen, everybody listened. There are people moving through here that don't want us to succeed. If the medicine gets to the hospital, they lose their leverage. So they will try to make this ugly. You do not start anything. You protect people and you protect the corridor and you bring everybody home. That's the whole job. Say it back. Protect the corridor, bring everybody home, we said, all of us low. He nodded once and I saw the jaw thing. The clench just for a second, the name sitting behind his teeth. I didn't think anything of it. I thought it was nerves. Chapel didn't get nervous, but I was young enough to think everybody did. We sat down in a soccer field near the harbor that somebody had marked with orange smoke. The smell hit me before my boots did. You never get used to that smell. Wet concrete and diesel and something underneath it, something sweet and wrong that your body understands before your brain does. The smell of a place where the living and the not living are lying too close together. There were survivors everywhere, sitting on curbs wrapped in whatever they'd grabbed. A man in a business suit, filthy, holding a single shoe like it was the most important object on earth. Kids who weren't crying, which is worse than kids crying. Kids who'd used up all their crying and were just quiet now, watching the way I used to watch the older guys, learning how to carry it. The local rescue crews were exhausted. They'd been at it for 4 days with no sleep and no equipment, digging with their hands and car jacks and hope. When they saw us, the gear, the med convoy behind us, some of them just sat down right there on the rubble and put their faces in their hands. Relief does that. It comes out looking like collapse. We got the doctors moving toward the field hospital. We opened the harbor road, cleared 2 collapse points, held a corner while a family got pulled out alive. A grandmother, 2 kids, the grandmother wouldn't let go of my sleeve, kept saying thank you in a language I didn't speak but understood anyway. That's most of what the first day was. Digging, lifting, carrying. And then near dusk, we got a call about the school. It had been a 3-story building, they said. A school on the ground floor, apartments above. When the quake hit, the top 2 floors had come straight down onto the first, but not flat. They'd folded at an angle, and that angle had left a wedge of space near the back, a triangle of survival where the stairwell had held. The local crew swore they'd heard tapping, faint, from deep inside, but they couldn't reach it, too unstable. Every time they moved a slab, the whole pile shifted and groaned like it was deciding whether to finish the job. Chapel looked at that pile for a long time. "We've got maybe an hour of light," he said. "Cole, raise on me. Everybody else hold the perimeter. There's people watching us from those buildings, and I don't love it." He was right. I'd felt them too. Up on the higher ground where the water hadn't reached, there were figures, not survivors. Survivors come toward you. These stayed back and still, watching the convoy, counting us, doing math about what we were worth. But that was a problem for later. Right then there was tapping under a mountain of dead concrete, and Chapel was already tying off a rope. I'll tell you something about Chapel that I didn't fully understand until this exact moment. He never sent a man anywhere he wouldn't go first, and the tighter the space, the more likely he was to take it himself. The other commanders I'd known, the good ones even, they ran the op from behind. Chapel ran it from inside the hole. He went in first. I fed him the rope and the light, and I lay flat with my head near the gap, so I could hear him, and I watched him disappear into a crack in the world barely wider than his shoulders. Dust came up in a slow breath. I heard concrete tick and settle. I heard him breathing, steady, slow, on purpose, the way he taught us. If you panic in a tight space, you use up the air and the space both. "Talk to me," I called down. Stairwell held, his voice came back, muffled far. "There's a void, it's hold on." Silence, the pile groaned. I felt my own heartbeat in the concrete under my chest. "Chapel." "There's someone here," he said, and his voice had changed, just slightly. A man who'd found a body would have said it flat. A man who'd found a survivor would have said it fast. He said it like neither. He said it careful. "Alive, female, unconscious. She's pinned, but I can get to her." "Copy, you need raise." No, give me a second." And then, from the bottom of that hole, from underneath thousands of pounds of a fallen school, I heard my commander go completely silent. Not the working silence, not the breathing slow silence. A silence like a man who has just seen something he was not ready to see. "Chapel, you good?" Nothing, the rope in my hands had gone slack. Down in the dark, he wasn't moving. "Elias," I never used his name, I don't know why I did then. "Talk to me, man." And when he finally spoke, his voice came up out of that hole so quiet I almost lost it under the wind. 2 words, not to me. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the dark, or to the woman, or to somebody who wasn't even there. "Who is she?" I didn't know what he meant. I thought maybe the dust had gotten to him. I didn't know yet that he'd just seen a ghost he'd been carrying for 6 years, drawn in ink on the inside of a stranger's forearm. I need to back up. Just a little. Because to understand what happened in that hole, you have to understand the name behind Chapel's teeth. I only got the whole story later in pieces, some from him and some from the other old guys who'd been there. But I'll give it to you clean so it makes sense. 6 years before that earthquake, before I was ever on the team, Chapel had a brother. Not blood, the other kind. The kind you make in the worst places on Earth. His name was Jonah Castellano. Call sign Reef because he grew up on the water and because he was the kind of steady you could break waves against and he'd still be standing. Everybody said Reef was the best of them, not the loudest, not the flashiest, the best. The one who'd carry your ruck when you were done, the one who remembered your kid's birthday, the one who prayed with chapel before the jump so the church went quiet. Reef had a tattoo on the inside of his left forearm. He designed it himself. A sparrow, mid-flight, wings up, and one of the wings had a thin white line through it, like a scar, like it had been broken once and healed crooked. There was a story there, a real bird, when he was a kid, that he'd found with a busted wing and splinted with popsicle sticks and kept in a shoebox until it could fly. It flew off and never came back, and he said that was the whole point. That's what saving something means. You don't get to keep it. In the sparrow's little feet, a lantern, and under the whole thing, 3 words in his own handwriting. Still flying. That was Reef. On a mission Chapel led, I won't give you the where, it doesn't matter. It was one of those places that isn't on the map for anybody's good. It went wrong. The kind of wrong nobody planned for and nobody could have stopped. They got separated during an extraction. Reef stayed back to hold a doorway so the rest of them could get civilians out. He did the job. Everybody got out. Except Reef didn't. They couldn't get back to him. The whole street came apart, gunfire and then a building fire and then a wall of the exact kind of no that the world sometimes just decides on. Chapel tried 3 times to go back in. 3. His own guys had to physically hold him to keep him from a 4th that would have killed him, and accomplished nothing. When it was over, Reef was gone. They recovered him days later after. And here is the part that never left Chapel, the part that lived behind his teeth for 6 years. Reef hadn't died in the fight. The medical people said he'd been wounded but not killed in that doorway. He'd been alive for a while after, somewhere in the hours between when they lost him and when the fire took the block. Alive and alone, and as far as anyone knew, nobody with him. No brother, no hand, just the dark and the smoke and the long wait. That was the thing. Chapel could carry losing him. Soldiers can carry loss, it's the tax. What he couldn't carry was the alone. The idea that Reef, who never let a single one of them face anything by themselves, had faced the last thing by himself. That when it came, nobody was holding his hand. Chapel and the surviving guys got the tattoo, all of them. The exact sparrow, the exact broken wing, the exact lantern, still flying in Reef's own writing, copied off a photo. It was theirs, a closed thing. You couldn't buy it, you couldn't earn it, you got it because you'd been there in that street and lost him. 6 men on Earth had that mark. That's what you need to know. Now back to the hole. Chapel was down there a long time, longer than the extraction should have taken. I kept talking to him, feeding him line, and slowly he came back to himself. His voice steadied. He started calling out what he needed, a smaller pry bar, a med kit, a board. Raise, and I lowered them down. We couldn't fit where he was, but we could reach the mid-void and pass things hand to hand into the dark. She's pinned at the hip by a beam, Chapel called up. Not crushing, trapping, I can lever it if you take her weight when it goes, on 3. We did it on 3. The beam moved maybe 6 inches. It was enough. I heard Chapel grunt and shift, and then, careful as a man handling something holy, he started bringing her out. She came up into the last of the daylight, and I got my first look at her. She was maybe 40. Hard to tell under the dust. Everyone in that town was the same gray color coated in it, like statues that had learned to bleed. She had short, dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that even unconscious looked like it had spent its whole life set against a wind. Not a soft face. A used one. A good one. She had an old scar through one eyebrow and newer cuts everywhere and a leg that was wrong at the ankle. And she wasn't from there. I don't know how I knew right away, but I did. Her clothes. A field vest under the grime, the kind aid workers wear with faded patches. A little laminated card on a lanyard, cracked, that I couldn't read. She wasn't a local who'd been in the school when it fell. She was one of the helpers. She'd come to this town to save it, and it had tried to bury her for the trouble. Chapel came up out of the hole last, filthy, and he wouldn't take his eyes off her. We got her flat, and the medic in me kicked in, and I started running hands over her looking for the bad bleeds, and that's when I saw it. Her left sleeve had torn away at the elbow, and there on the inside of her forearm, under a layer of gray dust that I wiped away without thinking. A sparrow, wings up. One wing with a thin white scar line through it, healed crooked, a lantern in its feet. And under it, in handwriting that wasn't a tattoo artist's clean lettering, but somebody's real, uneven hand. Still flying. I froze. I didn't know the story yet, but I knew our tattoo. I'd earned mine my own way later, but I knew every line of it, and this was ours. Exact. On the arm of a woman we'd just pulled out of a school in a town on the far side of the world. A woman none of us had ever seen. I looked up at Chapel. He was already looking at me, and his face, I'd never seen his face do that. In 6 years, I'd seen Chapel calm under fire, calm over dead friends, calm in front of generals, and calm in front of God. I had never once seen him look afraid. He looked afraid now, and underneath the fear, something worse and better than fear. Hope, the kind of hope that hurts to hold. "Who is she?" he said again, barely a whisper, not asking me, asking the whole cruel universe. "How does she have that?" And before either of us could say another word, the first shot cracked off the concrete 2 feet from my head. The watchers had finished their math, and they'd decided we were worth it. Everything happened at once, the way it always does. Ray's yelling contact, the perimeter guys returning fire, the medical crew scrambling the survivors back toward the harbor road, dust jumping off the rubble in little spurts where rounds were landing. They were up on the high ground, the men who'd been watching all day, and they'd waited for exactly this, for us to be low, bent over a rescue, hands full. Smart, cruel, and smart. And I want you to understand what Chapel did in that second, because it tells you everything. He did not draw down and start hunting the shooters. That was his job, his whole life's training, and there were targets, and he was the best shot on the team. Any other man would have gone straight to the fight. Chapel put his body between the incoming fire and the unconscious woman. He got flat over her, covering her with himself, and he started calling movement orders in that same low, steady voice, moving us backward off the exposed pile toward hard cover, dragging her with us on the board, and the whole time his body stayed between her and the guns. A woman he'd known for 90 seconds, a stranger with a dead man's ink on her arm. "Cover and move," he was saying. "By pairs, nobody left, nobody left." Nobody left, that was Reef's price. That was the whole thing behind his teeth. We got off the pile. We got behind a fallen wall thick enough to eat rounds. The perimeter guys had the shooters' heads down. And Chapel knelt over that woman in the shelter of the broken wall, breathing hard. One hand pressed flat over the sparrow on her arm like he could hold it in place, like he was afraid it would fly off if he let go. "Stay with me," he told her. She couldn't hear him. She was somewhere deep. "Whoever you are, you stay with me. You do not do this alone." That last part he said so quietly, I don't think he knew he'd said it out loud. You do not do this alone. 6 years he'd been trying to say that to a ghost. And here, in the worst possible second, under fire over a stranger, it had finally found a mouth. We couldn't stay behind that wall. The shooters had the high ground, and we had a woman with a broken ankle, a leaking gash on her scalp, and a head injury that meant every minute unconscious was a minute working against her. The field hospital was 11 blocks in, through streets that were half water and half rubble, with armed men now confirmed active in the district and very interested in us. Chapel made the call the way he made all of them. Fast, and like it cost him nothing, even when I knew it cost him everything. "We're not fighting our way out of a shooting gallery with a casualty," he said. "We move to the harbor road, we get her to the aid station there, we hold the corridor, and we bring the doctors to her if we have to. Raise, you and the perimeter suppress and peel. Cole, she's yours. She does not leave your hands, understand me." "She's mine," I said, and I meant it in a way I didn't have words for. We moved. I'm not going to give you the whole firefight beat by beat, because honestly, from inside it, a firefight isn't a story. It's noise and weight and your own breathing and the animal in your chest trying to make you drop everything and run. What I'll tell you is what I saw of Chapel, because that's the part that mattered. He was everywhere. He'd peel back to fire and buy us 3 seconds, then he'd be back at the board, taking a corner of it, moving us through the water. There was a stretch, maybe 40 meters of open street with a shooter working it from a window, where any sane man would have dropped the casualty and taken cover. Chapel took the exposed side of the board himself, put himself between her and the window the whole crossing, walked it slow because you can't run with a spine board, and slow through a shooter's lane is the longest walk in the world. He made it, we made it. A round went through the water beside my boot, and I felt it more than heard it. And halfway across, she woke up. Just for a second. Her eyes came open, gray eyes, clear gray, startling in that dust gray face, and they found Chapel's right above her, straining, walking her out of the killing lane. She looked at him, he looked at her, and I swear something passed between them that I didn't have any part in. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear it over everything, but Chapel could. His face, for half a step, his whole face broke, then reset. And then we were across, behind cover, and she was gone under again, back into the dark, and I didn't get to ask. We reached the harbor road. We got her into the aid station, a school gymnasium that hadn't fallen, now full of cots and lantern light and doctors who hadn't slept in a week. The perimeter guys locked the corridor down behind us. The shooting fell off. The men on the high ground had wanted an easy convoy, not a war with us, and once we made it costly, they faded back into the wreckage to wait for softer prey. That's how those things usually end, not with a victory. With the other side, just deciding you're not worth it today. The doctors took her. Ankle, scalp, concussion, some cracked ribs, dehydration, bad but survivable. She'd been under that school for 4 days. 4. On tapping. On hope. On whatever's inside a person that keeps knocking on a slab of concrete for 4 days when every reasonable part of them knows nobody's coming. I sat down against the gymnasium wall and my hands started shaking, the way they do after, once it's safe enough for your body to admit what just happened. Chapel didn't sit, he stood by her cot. He wouldn't leave it. A doctor tried to shoo him off and he just looked at her, and the doctor decided she had other patients. I got up and went over. "Chapel," I said, "what is it, the tattoo? You know that tattoo?" He didn't answer for a while. He was looking at her arm, at the sparrow, cleaned of dust now, dark and clear under the lantern light. His own sleeve was down, but I knew what was under it. The same bird, the same broken wing. "That's Reef's," he said finally. "Who's Reef?" And that's when he told me. Right there in the lantern light with the woman breathing slow between us, he told me the whole thing. Reef. The doorway. The 3 tries to go back. The recovery after, and the part that lived behind his teeth alone. That Reef had died alone in the dark with no brother's hand. 6 of us have that mark, he said. 6 men on this earth. I know all 6. She's not one of them. He shook his head slowly. "That's not a tattoo she copied off the internet, Cole. Look at the writing under it. That's his hand. That's Reef's actual handwriting. Still flying, you can't fake his hand. I've seen it 1,000 times. She got that from him. She had to have gotten that from him. That's not possible. He died 6 years ago, on the other side of the..." "I know," his voice cracked just a hair. "I know it's not possible. That's why I keep asking who she is, because there's only one way she has his handwriting on her arm, Cole." He looked at me, and there was that terrible hope again, the kind that could break a man worse than any bullet. She was there, at the end. Whoever she is, she was with him. I felt the hair go up on my arms. "You think..." "I think," Chapel said very quietly, "that I've spent 6 years believing my brother died alone. And I think this woman might be the reason he didn't. We couldn't leave." Officially, our task was done, corridor held, casualty delivered, convoy safe. Command wanted us to rotate out at dawn. Chapel requested we stay through the next day to help clear 2 more collapse sites. That was true, and it was needed, and it was also, everyone understood without saying it, so he could be there when she woke up. She woke up near midnight. I was half asleep against the wall. Chapel hadn't moved. I heard the change in her breathing before I heard anything else, the ragged catch of a person surfacing, remembering their body, remembering pain. I opened my eyes. She was looking at the ceiling, then at the room. The cots, the lanterns, the doctors, working out that she was alive. You could see her doing the math, the same math I'd done 100 times. The AM, I still hear math. Then she saw Chapel. And here's the thing. She wasn't afraid of the big armored stranger standing over her cot. She looked at him the way you look at a face from a photograph you've stared at for years, like she half recognized him, like she'd been looking for him without knowing his name. Her voice was a ruin, 4 days of dust in it. She stopped, tried again. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Chapel's hand moved to his own sleeve, pushed it up, held his forearm out over her cot into the lantern light. The sparrow, the broken wing, still flying. She looked at his arm, and her eyes filled and spilled, silent, running sideways down into her dust-gray hair. "Oh," she said. "Just that, oh, there you are." And Chapel, my commander, the calmest man I ever knew, the man who stayed steady over dead friends and in front of God. Chapel made a sound I'd never heard a grown man make and went down on his knees beside her cot like the strings had been cut. "Who are you?" he whispered, not scared now, begging. "Please tell me who you are." Her name was Mara Kellen. She was a nurse, not military, never military. A field nurse, the kind who goes to the places everybody else is running away from with a duffel bag and a med kit and no gun and no armor, just a stubborn refusal to let people die easy when they could die a little less alone. She'd been doing it for 20 years. Earthquakes, floods, the other kind of disaster, the human kind. She'd been in this town, in that school, running a little clinic out of the ground floor, when the ground opened up. But 6 years ago, she'd been somewhere else. She'd been in a place I won't name, because Chapel never named it, and I won't either. A place that had come apart in fire and gunfire. She'd been working a makeshift aid post 2 streets back from where it was worst. And in the chaos, in the hours after the fighting rolled through, a wounded man had been carried to her by 2 locals who'd found him in a doorway and couldn't leave him. A big man, American, torn up bad, past saving, and he knew it and she knew it, and this was the part where her voice went so quiet the whole gymnasium seemed to lean in. He was calm about it. He wasn't afraid. She said in 20 years she'd held a lot of dying hands and almost all of them were afraid. And his wasn't, and she never forgot it. He didn't want anything for himself, she said. That's the thing I couldn't get past. He was dying and every single thing he said was about somebody else. His team, he kept saying, did they get out? Did the family get out? The civilians. He wouldn't rest until I told him yes, everyone got out, even though I didn't know, I told him yes. It was the only mercy I had to give. I told him everyone got out. Her tears ran. His whole face changed. Like that was the only thing that mattered. He said then it worked, like it was a math problem and it had come out right. Chapel had both her hands in his now. He wasn't trying to hide his face anymore. There was no point. He talked about you, she said. All of you. He didn't have your names or he had your call signs. I don't remember. My hands were so full, but he talked about his brothers. He said there were 6 of them. He said. She had to stop. She breathed. He said, tell them I'm not scared. That's what he wanted them to know. Tell them Reef wasn't scared at the end. He said you'd worry about that. He said you specifically. She looked at Chapel. The one who leads, he'll blame himself. He'll think I was scared and alone. Tell him I wasn't. Tell him I had good company at the end and I wasn't scared, and it worked. The gymnasium was completely silent. Even the doctors had stopped. He drew it for me, she said. She turned her arm over, showed the sparrow, the broken wing, still flying in that uneven hand. With a marker on the back of a supply form before while he still could. His hand was barely working. He drew this bird and he told me the story, the real bird, the shoebox, letting it fly off. And he said, if you ever meet one of my brothers, show them this and they'll know I wasn't lying. And tell them I'm still flying. She swallowed. I got it made permanent a year later. So I couldn't lose it. So if I ever found one of you, I'd have it. I've been carrying his message on my arm for 6 years, hoping. I go to a lot of terrible places. I always thought this line of work, sooner or later our paths would cross. Soldiers and nurses end up in the same terrible rooms. A broken little laugh. I just never thought I'd have to get buried under a school to finally deliver it. I have watched strong men break in a lot of ways. I've seen it be loud, and I've seen it be violent, and I've seen it be a slow leak over years. I never saw it be like this. Chapel didn't sob. He didn't make a scene. He just knelt there holding a stranger's hands and let 6 years fall off him all at once, quietly like snow coming off a roof in one soft slide. His shoulders came down 2 inches. His jaw, the jaw that had held that name behind it for 6 years, unclenched. I actually watched it happen. The name came out from behind his teeth, and it wasn't a stone anymore. It was just his brother's name. He wasn't alone, Chapel said, not a question, testing the words, learning to believe them. Somebody was with him. Somebody was with him, Mara said. I was with him. He wasn't scared, and the last thing on his mind was that all of you got home. She squeezed his hands with what strength she had, which wasn't much. He didn't spend 1 second of it alone, and he didn't spend 1 second of it afraid, and I have been trying to tell you that for 6 years. Chapel bowed his head over their joined hands. And here's the part I think about most. The whole reason we were in that town, the whole reason we were even in that district, the whole reason Chapel personally climbed down into a hole barely wide enough for his shoulders, it was to save people. That's what we did. That was the mission. Protect the corridor, bring everybody home. But standing there in that gymnasium, I understood that it went the other way too. He'd gone down into that hole to save her. And she'd been down there under 4 days of concrete, carrying the one thing that would save him. 6 years he'd been drowning slow in a guilt nobody could reach, and the rescue rope had been buried under a collapsed school on the far side of the world, tattooed on the arm of a woman knocking on a slab of concrete, refusing to die because she still had a message to deliver. Who saved who? I've never been able to answer that. We had one more night, and it didn't stay quiet. Near 3 in the morning, the armed group made a run at the aid station. Not the men from the high ground, a different bunch, bolder, going for the medical supplies now that they were all consolidated in one place. They hit the harbor road perimeter hard. I want to tell you about Chapel in that fight, because it's the same lesson as the first one, and I don't think you understand a man until you see him do the same true thing twice. He put himself between the guns and the wounded, again. The aid station was full of casualties who couldn't move, Myra among them on her cot, ribs cracked, ankle splinted, useless in a fight. And when the rounds started coming through the gymnasium walls, Chapel's first move, before he fired a single shot, was to get his people flipping cots and dragging the wounded behind the thick concrete of the old locker room. He carried 2 himself, and when it came down to holding the doorway, the actual doorway, the choke point, the place where the whole thing would be won or lost, he took it. The doorway. I don't think it was lost on him. I know it wasn't. I saw his face when he set up in that doorway with the wounded behind him and the dark in front of him. It was the same doorway Reef had held 6 years ago. The one Reef didn't walk away from. Chapel held it. He held it for 19 minutes until rays brought the peel around and the perimeter closed the gap and the attackers broke and ran, the way they always eventually do when you make it cost more than it's worth. He held the doorway and nobody behind him got hit. Nobody left. Everybody home. When it was over, he came back inside, and he went to Mara's cot first before he even racked his weapon to make sure the flipped cots had held, to make sure she was okay. She looked up at him, this exhausted man in the doorway of the rest of his life, and she said, "He'd have done exactly that. The doorway. He'd have done exactly what you just did." "I know," Chapel said. "That's why we couldn't leave him, because he'd never have left us." "He knows that," she said. "That was the whole message. He knows, Elias." It was the first time she'd used his name. We rotated out the next afternoon. The corridor held. The doctors kept working. More teams came in behind us, fresh, and the town began the long, slow business of digging itself back into a shape that could hold life again. That's how those things go. Nobody wins an earthquake. You just carry what you can, and you leave the place a little more possible than you found it, and you go home. But before we left, there was the goodbye at the cot, and I want to give you that because that's the real end of the story. Chapel knelt down by Mara one last time. She was doing better, sitting up, color back, that hard, good face of hers set against the world again. She'd already told the doctors she wasn't going home. Of course she wasn't. She was going to heal up and stay and keep the clinic running. 20 years of running toward the terrible rooms, a broken ankle wasn't going to be the thing that turned her around. "I don't know how to thank you," Chapel said, "for carrying it 6 years on your arm. Through every terrible place you've been, on the chance you'd find one of us." "You already thanked me," she said. "You dug me out of a school." "That was the job." "Was mine?" She smiled at him. 20 years I've been doing this, and I used to wonder what it was for, all the ones you can't save, all the terrible rooms, and then one day a dying stranger hands you a message and says, carry this, and 6 years later a man digs you out of the ground and you finally get to set it down." Her eyes shone. "That's what it's for, I know that now. Everything I did for 20 years, it was also I'd be in exactly the right terrible room to hand you your brother back." Chapel took her hand. He turned her arm over. He put his own forearm next to hers. Sparrow to sparrow, broken wing to broken wing. Still flying to still flying in the same handwriting, the dead man's handwriting. The only copy of it left in the world, and now there were 2, side by side. "You've got the 7th one," he said. "There were only ever 6, now there's 7. She looked at the 2 arms lying together, the matched birds, and she cried and she laughed and she said, "I never got to earn it." "You earned it more than any of us," Chapel said. "We just lost him, you stayed with him." We flew out over the coast the way we'd flown in. Chapel sat up front again with his map on his knee, hands busy, face still. But it was a different still. I'd figured out by then that there are 2 kinds of quiet in a man like that. There's the quiet of holding something down, And there's the quiet of having finally set it down. For 6 years he'd had the first kind. Now he had the second. He caught me looking at him. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he pulled his sleeve down over the sparrow and looked out the window, finally, at the broken coastline sliding by underneath. He wasn't scared, Chapel said, to the window, to the coast, maybe to Reef. 6 years I thought he was scared and alone in the dark, and it was my fault, and the whole time somebody was holding his hand and he wasn't scared, and it worked. He let out a breath that seemed to have been waiting in him for those whole 6 years. It worked, Reef. Everybody got home. You can stop holding the doorway. I looked away. That one wasn't mine to watch. I've thought about it a lot since then. Why it happened the way it did. The odds of it. A message drawn in marker on a supply form on the worst day of one man's life, made permanent on a nurse's arm, carried through 20 terrible rooms and 4 days under a collapsed school, delivered by accident to the one man on Earth who needed it, by a commander who happened to be the kind of man who climbs down into the hole himself. People want it to mean something. They want a lesson. I used to want that too. But I think the truest thing I can tell you is smaller than a lesson. We spend so much of our lives afraid of the same thing Reef could have been afraid of. Not the ending. The alone at the ending. The dark with nobody's hand in it. Chapel carried that fear for a brother for 6 years, and the thing that finally set him free wasn't strength, or a win, or revenge. It was just the news that somebody had been there. That when it came, a stranger stayed. That the worst room in the world had one good person in it holding on. That's the whole thing. That's all any of us are really asking, not to be saved. We know better than to ask that. Just when it comes, whatever it is, for whoever we love and for us. Don't let them do it alone. Somebody stayed with Reef, and 6 years later, half a world away, buried under a school, that somebody was still flying.